Okay, we're taping this early February. We are in Burbank in the Disney offices. Bob Iger is here. We had talked about doing this when I was at Grantland, and I don't remember what happened. But you said yes.
How long ago was that?
I think I got suspended, and then it got kind of awkward, and we couldn't do it. But I was going to come in, and we were going to talk basketball for like an hour, and it just kind of never happened. But then when you had your book came out, you did all these podcasts, and I was like, all right. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to read this book. And then I loved it, and I ripped through it, and I emailed you, and I was like, I loved your book. I want to do a podcast about it. I liked so many things about it, and I really thought it was fascinating and also like an interesting thing for you to do because it was pretty candid, and I was surprised that you shared that much because you're still a pretty powerful person here.
I made a decision that if I were going to write a book, that it had to be candid.
Yeah.
And then and I made that promise to myself. And then after I made the promise and I agreed to write the book and I began the process, I realized that being candid was not the easiest thing in the world, or maybe being generous.
Yeah.
Meaning with information and with opinion. And the hardest thing, of course, was when I talked about or wrote about people.
Yeah.
I really did not want to either appear to be overly critical or overly negative, really, about anyone. And that was hard.
Was there stuff you took out like at the 11th hour where you're like, I don't know,
yes.
maybe I'll
Yes, I spent 50 hours on July 4th weekend, 5-day weekend, making 2,800 edits.
Really?
Yes, I did a final pass, not only to improve the book, which I thought needed improvement, but to address, or in that case, readdress what I was saying about certain things. And I took some things out. Yeah, either I softened some things about some people, or I took some things out that I, in the end, felt might be a little too personal.
Because it felt very purposeful. But I think the reason it resonated with me so much, because it was pretty, it's a pretty simply structured book. It's like, here's my life. Here are the things I've learned. Here's my journey. It wasn't all great. I got lucky in a couple ways, but you sprinkled in some stuff. And obviously I've been in charge of some things this past decade before the 2010s, never. And, I've always thought about, am I doing this right? Am I talking to my people enough? And in some ways, because I didn't know enough about it, that was actually a strength, right? Like I'm coming at it differently, and the way I did it, I think worked in a lot of ways. And then in other ways, like some of the stuff you had in there about being pessimistic.
Yes.
How dangerous that can be to the staff. And I'm like, I can think of 7 times when I probably brought that into work, and you forget sometimes when you're the person, they're all feeding off you. You're like the best player on the basketball team or something. They're all feeding off your energy. Mm-hmm. Like Karl Anthony Towns in Minnesota right now, when he's bummed out.
He's not traded.
Yeah, he's like, man, love to get out of here. But when did you realize that about the whole optimism thing, or was it natural?
I think, I don't know that any of this was really natural. Maybe some was within me and I just didn't know it existed. And through experience, I discovered it, or it was drawn out. I learned a lot over the years. First of all, I've been at this a long time. I've been at this company, ABC Disney, for 45 years. And if you include the year that I was a weatherman in Ithaca, New York, I've been in this business for 46 years,
right,
in a variety of different places and positions, and worked for a lot of people, many very talented, many very generous in terms of what they taught me. And I think I've just accumulated a huge amount of knowledge.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because it was the accumulation of that knowledge that kind of led to my agreeing to write a book. There were people who came to me and said, "You've got a great story to tell." And I said, well, okay, that's nice, but I didn't really feel a need to tell the story. And they said, well, you also have, in telling the story, you have things that you can impart to people, lessons. And that resonated with me because I'm asked all the time by people, whether it's kids in college or business school, or people that work with us, or people that I just come across, and they ask always, giving me some advice, or what's the best lesson you ever learned, or what's the secret to your success? And so the combination of people saying you have an interesting story to tell, and then the opportunity for me to impart some of those lessons and be generous with them, in an efficient way, in other words, do it in a way that could reach more people, led me to agree to write something. And then that all sounds very easy. And then you have to figure out how to make it digestible, how to make it interesting, I had never really read a business book before I started to do this. I subsequently read Shoe Dog, if you consider that a business book. But I didn't want to write something that was dry and just educational in nature.
So you were writing this yourself. There was no like ghost person that you just talked to.
I hired someone to help me with this. I wrote the first chapters in my own words, and then we agreed to a format, and then he interviewed me for each chapter and came back with basically a transcript of what I had said. And then from that, I then wrote it in each one ultimately in my own, in my own words.
So you're like a Starbucks with the other writers, like working on your manuscript.
It's funny. Someone sent me a note today. A lot of people have reached out saying, okay, this was great. Now, could you give me even more advice?
Right.
And I got an email today from one of those people, and they said, you wrote a book. Tell me, when did you figure out when did you find the time to do that? Like, how'd you fit that in? He's asked me about exercise and family and obviously work. And it was hard finding the time, from everything else that's going on in my life. But I figured it out. I carved out the time. Something was sacrificed in the process, but I don't know what.
Right.
Probably a little bit from here and a little bit from there.
Obviously you're in a competitive industry. Do you worry about giving tips that are actually going to help competitors? Because you're in not a war, but you're in a battle with a bunch of different big media companies right now.
I never thought about that in this case. You're the first person that raised that. It's never even come up, meaning in my mind even.
Because I feel like Belichick would never do this.
I think you're right.
I'm putting my lessons in here. I'll do that when I'm retired.
I think you're right about that.
What was the thing you were most afraid of when you read it?
When I read it or wrote it?
No, when you wrote it. When it was about to come out.
I worried the most about it seeming like an ego trip. Look at me, my smiling face and my name on the cover, and look what I've done. I did not want it to be self-congratulatory.
Yeah.
And I did not want in any way for it to be perceived as just another way for me to let everybody know what I've done.
That's actually why I didn't read it right away. Because I was like, oh, he's doing the thing everybody else does. And then a couple of people I trusted were like, you should read the Iger book. It's actually really interesting. And I think the thing that resonated over everything else, I think the most was how much luck you need with stuff. And you were pretty open about that in the book, that you're going to have these, and I know I've had it myself. You have these 4 to 5 moments in your life where there's almost a fork in the road and you kind of need some luck. It's like a football game. It's like Niners Chiefs 3rd and 15 on they need the 44-yard pass and it flips. And you had a couple of those moments, and I didn't realize that with your journey.
I think I had many of those moments. Yeah. And when you look back on the journey like this, you count them up because you're writing about them, it's pretty extraordinary. And I've talked about that over the years, and everybody says, oh, it's not luck. You have to have talent too. I think it's a combination of things. In my case, as I look back, it was a combination of having a great work ethic.
Yeah.
I was just either born with that or my parents instilled that in me. And I was always able to kind of outwork other people. And that got me far. I never thought it was about intellect or even knowledge. It was just that I worked hard. And I never complained about working. I showed up and was ready to work. That helped. I had great teachers along the way. That really helped.
Yeah, you lucked out a couple of times.
I did. Well, do you think about the fact that I worked 30 of the years that I was working, 10 were with Roone Arledge.
The greatest sports executive of all time.
Exactly. Tom Murphy and Dan Burke, mostly Tom in that period of time because Dan retired earlier, and 10 working for Michael Eisner. 30 years working for 3 people who are considered, among the best in the business.
Right.
And I learned a lot from them. And then luck, too. I had bosses retire, at a time when maybe I was just ready to take their job. They could have stayed another 5 years and I might never have gotten their job. We were bought by Disney. That wasn't by my design. I wouldn't be the head of CEO of Disney if they didn't buy the company I was working for. As for instance, and there were other things along the way too. Not just things that I said yes to, things that I said no to.
Right. But there's those little moments, like you had that in your book about when something got screwed up and it was your fault. And Roone Arledge asked, whose fault was it? And I've been in this situation. I love when people say, yeah, I screwed that up, my bad, versus either lying, deflecting, throwing somebody under the bus. I think you learn a lot about people in that situation. And you owned it, and you said he treated you differently after that, which I think actually made sense to me.
He treated me differently, and interestingly enough, it was very empowering for me too, because just the fact that I owned up to a mistake that was made and I survived gave me sort of a lot more courage and a lot more confidence, a lot more belief in myself.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, and I got a lot of pats on the back from people that I work with. And they couldn't believe that I had opened my mouth and admitted something. And it was small, and now that I think back on it. But
you were pretty candid about the Eisner relationship, and I spent some time with him over the years because I was on the Topps board with him for a couple of years and got to watch him in action during these 4-hour meetings. And some of the stuff you captured in there, I saw it. Like if he's in a room with 10 people, he's going to talk the most, and he's going to, he has a high usage rate, to borrow a basketball term, but has a lot of gems and is a really interesting guy. And he had that one thing in there about when he was I forget what it was, some building or facility, and he was upset about the lamps, or there's like pointing this out and that out and all like the little meticulous stuff that he cared about. And you realize that like added up to the bigger picture, which is he saw all these little things as part of the bigger thing. I've never been able to operate like that, but I've always appreciated people who could.
I learned a tremendous amount just watching him, actually, because he has still quite an eye. And one of the things that's amazing to me about him is his eyes don't look only at one thing or in one direction. They look in multiple directions. We'd go to a theme park and we'd walk down a path, between attractions or whatever. And he was looking at the horizon to see what you could see. Could we see outside, or, do we block line of sight from the outside? Sight intrusion, we call it. He would look at, whether the path looked narrow and it shouldn't have, or whether it led off into the distance to a place you looked like it might be a dead end. He always believed that in designing a park, you should always know where you are.
Yeah.
Wayfinding is really important so people don't feel a sense that they're lost or whatever. And that collection of things, is very valuable, even to the point where when I watch a movie today, you're always watching for, the main dialogue or action or whatever is central to a given scene. But at the same time, when I'm watching every corner of the screen. There are nuances sometimes that you catch, or you're basically taking a step back and and looking at the whole instead of one minor thing, even though that minor thing in sight could be the most important thing in terms of the plot. And just observing him doing that was quite valuable. And I liked working for Michael. Michael has an energy and a curiosity, and a lot of knowledge too.
I was always fascinated that you shared basketball tickets with him. Or you sat next to, what was it? You shared.
Michael had season tickets to the Clippers, which, dating way back, by the way.
Early Sterling.
Certainly the cheapest ticket in town, I guess. Maybe that's why Michael liked them. I don't know. But he had 2 tickets courtside, great seats, as you know, great seats. And he rarely went. And I like basketball, and I have 2 sons who are now 21 and 17 and both played some ball. And it was a great way for me to spend time with them. And so I shared the tickets with them. Ultimately, I shared half the season with them. And then I ended up getting seats next to them. And we still share those 2 seats.
I
have more, And we've gone to a few games together over the years too, but not many.
So when Disney War came out, the book about everything, the history of Disney and all that stuff, and you're in it prominently, and Eisner's really in it most of the time. And somebody spends that much time reporting, but it's not going to be 100% accurate, and some stuff is being skewed certain ways, and there's sources for certain things and things like that. When a book like that comes out, is your relationship with him the same after that? Like, what happens?
Didn't affect my relationship with Michael at all. I think we had similar feelings about the book in that we thought it was unfair in many respects, and the sources that James Stewart used were biased in many respects, because there were people that, and this goes back a long time, but they were people that had been let go from the company, and we didn't think they were objective. And I think Jim drew upon them maybe too often in the book. I ended up really only reading the sections or the pieces that I was in.
Right.
I was given a shot at addressing some of the things that were being written about me. And when I read them, they were so far off that it just didn't seem worth my while personally to
even like keep going.
To change them. And interestingly enough, it almost came back to haunt me, because when I was in the succession process to get the job as CEO, and the board asked me to see a headhunter at the end of the whole process, and he comes into the room that he was interviewing me in with a book with Disney Wars, and I can't remember whether they were dog-eared or whether they were Post-it notes, but there were a lot of them.
Yeah.
And he started questioning me in this interview, and I realized that all of his questions emanated from something that he had read in the book. And I had to stop him and say, wait a minute, if this is your source material for this interview, I don't really think this interview should go on.
When did you really officially buy into the whole concept of disrupting something that was working anyway?
It goes back a while. And this is something I think that is also maybe the result of people that I've worked for, Roone Arledge in particular, who was someone that was always willing to venture out of his comfort zone in terms of, in that case, how we covered sports. Right?
Yeah.
There's a lot that was working. You could apply very kind of basic principles to coverage of a live event or whatever. And he was always willing to take risks in that regard. And it typically paid off. Not every one of them worked, but if you look at the collection of them that he took, they paid off. And it was not only energizing, but it was an interesting lesson. And then when I became head of ABC Entertainment in the late 80s, I thought, it's kind of interesting looking back on it, I thought television had become somewhat boring in that a lot of the programs on network TV, it was really only about network then, in terms of original programming, were cookie cutter in nature. In other words, they were derivative of other programs that had been made, and no one was really breaking the mold. And that I thought the viewer really was ready for more, and that's what gave birth to Twin Peaks and Cop Rock and some other crazy stuff that we did. So I think I've been, I don't know if the word disruptor would be the right word to use back then, but I've always been willing to take some chances. And I think in doing so, I learned the value of doing that. But it also forces you, whether they work, and so you kind of try to analyze what was it about them that worked, or whether they don't work and you try to figure out what was it that created the failure. I think what I learned in all of that analysis is that the world was changing.
Yeah.
And that the changes in the world, particularly in our business, probably would occur in a more rapid, even more profound, on a more profound basis than anybody had anticipated.
Well, so you hop on the Pixar thing.
I was open-minded, yes. Well, the Pixar thing was a little different in that we had a great need as a company to turn the fortunes of Disney animation around. And I thought if we didn't do that, my tenure as CEO would be short-lived, because at that point, the perception of the company was so totally tied to the success or lack thereof of our animated films. And in trying to figure out how to fix it, I concluded the best way to do it would be to bring Pixar into the company and use the people who ran Pixar to turn Disney animation around.
Most people would have said, we just got to pour more resources into the animation. They wouldn't have actually said, we'll bring in a different company that's actually better than what we already have. I would say that's disruption.
Yes, I guess. Well, it's certainly risk-taking. Although
at the same time, you're betting on Steve Jobs, so
yes,
that's pretty safe.
He was
bet.
a disruptor.
Yeah,
yes.
It's a safe bet too.
I think maybe the lesson that I've sort of learned from all of this is, first of all, nothing stays the same. In fact, the opposite is the case in terms of things change much faster than you ever expected they would. And therefore, if you try to stay the same, you usually fail.
Yeah.
You're just left behind. You may hang on for a while, but eventually it all catches up to you. So if you're running a business in a dynamic world, particularly in a specific dynamic industry like the entertainment industry or the information entertainment industry, and you try to maintain any level of status quo, even if the status quo is working for you that day, you will eventually become irrelevant. And so unless you're in the business of changing with the times or ahead of the times, you're destined to fail. And that's always been within me. And again, I've never been afraid of taking big risks. Actually, I like taking risks.
I think the hardest thing to do is to take a risk with something that's already doing well. And I honestly felt like with ESPN last decade when I was there, I could feel it because you're protecting something, not you, the company is protecting something that's really successful and makes a ton of money. And that's when it becomes tough to go, we should do this, we should do that. Even something like Grantland, it's like, well, why are, there's a lot of people who are like, well, why are we doing this? We already have a website. And the pitch to Skipper and Walsh was always, because somebody else is going to do it. Isn't it better if we have this, if we try to do this storytelling site, that wouldn't you rather us have this than somebody else? And they thought about it correctly. And it was, at the time, I think, the right move. But I think it seemed like ESPN caught a couple years there when things are really about to move. And they're like, oh, shit, this is... And then they made the move, maybe 2 years late, but now they've caught up. But did you feel like that was happening, like they were late there?
Specifically, what element or what aspect of their business were they late? You mean in totality or?
Trusting the subs.
Oh.
And not being ready to move toward the streaming thing yet. And whether you could even see the streaming thing, I don't know what year was the right year to see it.
Yeah, I think, look, I think very difficult in the sense that ESPN's base business, the multi-channel cable and satellite business really, has been extremely profitable, as you noted, over the years. And that business model, while it is under some duress from all this disruption, is still delivering a fair amount of profitability at ESPN. And the alternative, which is a pivot in the direction of what they call direct-to-consumer over-the-top services, was not as obvious, meaning it was sitting out there to do, but the financial implications or ramifications of doing that were challenging, meaning it's not like you could flip a switch and go from being paid a significant amount of money, billions of dollars in cable and subscriber fees, and immediately earn that in direct-to-consumer subscription fees.
And you had some rules going against you too, where you couldn't do certain things.
Existing distributors, first of all, had rights that we had to keep in mind, and then a lot of the license deals or rights deals that we did with some of the big sports organizations like NFL and NBA, et cetera, didn't give us the ability to distribute in a different way.
Yeah.
So we were hampered by really three things. One, the business model that we knew was ultimately going to loom large long down the road, but hadn't really developed enough. So the economics weren't going to work. And then, of course, the other, whether you call them restrictions, encumbrances would be the best way to describe them. As the world has changed even more in the last few years, I happen to believe that eventually ESPN will be far more of a direct-to-consumer product. And by launching ESPN Plus and investing to grow that by buying more programming for it, giving them resources necessary, we're growing it nicely, but it's still relatively small, both economically and from a subscriber perspective than the mothership.
You wrote about in the book, you realized you had to make a move on this new streaming world, and it was going to cost a lot of money, and you had to talk your board into it. And you basically planned that almost like, like an attack. Like, we have to do this. Here's what it's actually going to cost. I know it doesn't totally make sense yet, but we have to do this right now.
We had an earnings call in August of 2015. And at that time, I decided to be quite candid, maybe overly so, or generous, with the investment community about what we were seeing in terms of subscriber losses, or erosion, as we called it. It had been haunting us for a while because it was the number one issue that investors were focused on regarding the Walt Disney Company because of the size of ESPN and its profitability.
Yeah.
And when I did that, I don't remember what the percentage was, 10, 15% decrease in our stock price. And that was a real wake-up call. I wanted to be candid. It was premeditated. It wasn't something that I accidentally declared. But anyway, in doing so, the reaction was pretty harsh. And the wake-up call was, okay, it's time for us to change, time for us to move. And the result was my making a presentation to the board about buying a majority position in a platform or a technology platform called BAMTech, which Major League Baseball helped create, to enable us to launch a direct-to-consumer service. And because of the amount of money involved in making that acquisition, it required an approval of the board. So what I did was I went to the board with the team, not just me, and not only presented that acquisition, but presented in the context of what ultimately would be a complete pivot strategically. And that was launching a direct-to-consumer ESPN and Disney branded service. And the board's reaction, first we made the acquisition of a small part in 2015. It was 2 years later in 2017 that we decided that we would buy up the majority position. And the board's reaction to that in the context of this change strategy was speed is of the essence. Get it done. They were great. The board was great about it.
And that was probably, like, if you'd waited 2 more years on that you would have been in a lot of trouble, I feel like.
Well, in yesterday's earnings call, I would have been talking about more ESPN erosion, and I wouldn't have been talking about Disney Plus growing subs or ESPN Plus growing subs, which dominated the call. Interest in these new businesses that we've launched is, these days anyway, far greater than anything else that we're doing, which I think.
You didn't have that much ESPN stuff in the book. I thought you would have more on like some of the right stuff that had happened. And like, I remember, what was it, 2004, 2005, potentially you could have had Sunday night and Monday Night Football.
2005,
which was, that could have been pretty good.
Yeah, there were a few other things, big things along the way, either that involved people or, business circumstances that I thought about putting in. And in the end, I wanted to write something that was not too inside baseball, no pun intended. And although I think because of the interest in sports, in particular the NFL, and interest in the ESPN, I probably could have, looking back, I probably could have written something that was of interest to a lot of people, a lot of readers, but I didn't. And I wanted everything that I wrote, I wanted to be in the context of other things I was writing.
Your journey. And
what happened there, actually, I think it was the 2005 negotiation. ABC had Monday Night Football since Monday Night Football was created in the early 70s. Roone Arledge deserved credit for that, the famous. Ultimately, what became the Don Meredith, Howard Cosell, Frank Gifford Booth didn't start that way. And ESPN came into what was then Sunday Night Football, first sharing it with Turner in the middle of the 80s, ultimately getting the whole package, and then using it to propel ESPN to incredible heights in terms of subscription fees. And by by 2005, there was greater interest from others in a network package. So ESPN was facing more competition, and ABC as well, for renewing their packages. And I concluded that it would be difficult to have them both and be profitable.
Right.
And actually, I made the decision, along with Michael Eisner, who was outgoing CEO at the time. I had been named, but I wasn't in the role yet. There was a 6-month period. So I guess we both made the decision that we would pass on ABC and preserve ESPN's position, move ESPN from Sunday to Monday.
Well, you had Desperate Housewives was like red hot too, right?
Desperate Housewives, and yes, was red hot on Sunday night. Well, I think we knew that wasn't necessarily going to last forever.
True.
That was, I think, a consideration, but the bigger one was we were worried about the economics.
Right.
Looking back on it, if we could do it again, I would do it differently.
Has anyone ever paid for sports rights and regretted it? I'm trying to remember. I mean, in the last 30 years, it seems like whatever the price is, at the very least, it's...
Well, I think, look, I mean, I've been around so long. We paid $309 million for the Calgary Olympics. I think it was 309. I can't believe I don't know where I got that number. Which occurred in winter of '88. It was the last Olympics we did. And we lost a lot of money on it. And
Well, you had bad luck because the weather was terrible.
we had bad luck. It was Winter Olympics, and they're great, but they're not as popular as summer.
True.
And if I recall correctly, I think Katarina Witt won the gold medal in figure skating, and which was great, but she wasn't an American. We only had American rights, and the U.S. hockey team faltered, and there were all kinds of other things going on. And we lost money, and it stung. Then we were owned by Capital Cities, and I remember them being very negative on it. And it kept us. It got us out of the Olympics. Now, since then, interestingly enough, that would be one. I don't know. Looking back, it was so long ago, whether we'd say we regretted it. But
you have some good ones coming up. Football's coming up.
You mean in terms of contracts?
Hoops is coming up.
Obviously,
your favorite sport, the NBA, is coming up.
The NBA. We have I
feel like you have a good inside track on that.
We have a couple of years left there.
Yeah.
And the NFL, of course, everybody's talking about that, is coming up. It remains to be seen exactly when.
But it seems like
a collective bargaining agreement they're trying to conclude before they agree to extend deals. But
you have more bidders.
We'll be at the table there.
You have more bidders than ever, though. With people saying the only thing that really matters anymore is sports rights, and that this is the one thing that gets people all over the place to watch something at the same time, other than like the Oscars.
Live sports, very valuable. Yeah. But I'm not concerned. I'm not complacent. I'm not concerned. And I'm not going to give anything away. We will be at the table. I guarantee that.
We're taping this, I don't know, 10 days after the Kobe's tragic accident. How long have you lived in LA?
I moved to LA this time around January of 2000. I had lived here before.
Have you ever seen the city like this, ever?
No, I wasn't here when Robert Kennedy was killed in 1968 or when John Kennedy was killed in 63, even though they weren't homegrown.
Yeah. Well, RFK was here, though.
RFK happened here. That's right, Ambassador Hotel. No, I haven't. I think it's been quite stunning in many respects to see. Shocking, stunning. Yeah.
It's only a couple times I can remember in the last 30, 40 years, the outpouring. Like I think when Princess Diana, when she died, could feel it with Prince and Michael Jackson to some degree, although I think they were a little bit older. It wasn't as probably shocking as this, but I was down there last Thursday for a Clipper game.
As was I.
And it was...
I was there Saturday.
It was so much more overwhelming than I expected. I honestly couldn't believe it. I'd never seen anything like it. I wasn't prepared for it. You can see it on TV and you can see it in pictures, but in being there was like nothing I'd ever seen.
Yeah. Well, 20 years, one team. As you know, in today's world, that doesn't happen very much. It never happens in football because players, Tom Brady would be the only thing that would be close, right?
Right.
I guess.
But he's
not 20 years.
He didn't belong to the New England region like I think Kobe did, because Kobe grew up here and he stayed here after and stayed. Yes. And I think that was the difference.
Yeah.
Along with a lot of other things.
He had a very, very winning personality in terms of his, at least to the community.
Yeah.
He was viewed as warm and affable and friendly. And
you got to know him pretty well, right?
Kobe, yes. Yeah.
One of the dirty secrets with you is you get to know all these NBA players. You have a lot of
I think
under
they
the
know
radar relationships.
They know I'm a fan.
Yeah.
And
you're you.
A lot of them want to meet the guy who's running Disney. And maybe it's because my wife used to be the co-anchor of NBA Inside Stuff.
Yeah.
They grew up watching her.
She was
actually
an icon of the early 90s.
We can go back to Kobe if you'd like, although before we leave that subject, look, the nature in which he died, the manner in which he died, the fact that his daughter was killed with him.
Yeah.
Just how incredibly abrupt it all seemed, his presence in the community. He didn't only play for this team and this town for 20 years, but he was a star, superstar in the sport, in the world, really. And he just connected with people. And I think a lot of people were shocked. But when it happened, it was quite interesting because just coincidentally that morning I had talked to Chris Paul on the phone, who had come to town to see his daughter's ballet recital.
Yeah.
And he and I had a quick conversation. And about 30 minutes later, I got a text from Jimmy Pitaro, who runs ESPN. Did you see the news about Kobe? I had not. And I immediately called Chris back, who was here, and he had just seen the same thing. We had trouble talking. And I didn't get back to Jimmy Pitaro and ESPN because I thought they would sense this, but I think because I'm here in LA and they're in East, I said, this is a gigantic story. This is bigger than we all can possibly imagine. Let's make sure, we jump on this collectively, meaning as a company, because we have a big TV station here, KABC, and ABC News has obviously an interest in stories like this, in ESPN, and our relationship with the NBA. It was a very, very difficult moment, really, and very sad, really sad.
Football has more fans and a bigger reach, but for whatever reason, and we could probably come up with 7, 8, 9, whatever, it seems like the NBA stars have a deeper connection with the fans. And I think part of it is they're basically naked on the court. They're wearing
no helmets.
Jersey shorts, no helmets. They're right there.
Fewer of them.
Yeah.
There are fewer of them. First of all, there are only 10.
They can be sold better for the games and all that. Like when you're promoting whatever, it's James Harden and the Rockets. And
they tend to have slightly longer careers.
True.
So go back, just a quick story about my wife and NBA inside stuff. I was fortunate enough to have attended President Obama's first inauguration and the inaugural ball that night. And because of, I guess, who we had an opportunity to meet the brand new president inaugurated that day and the brand new first lady before they came out on stage for basically their first public appearance that night at an inaugural ball. And they were both brought over to us. And I had met the president before, but my wife, Willow Bay, had not. And I said, Mrs. Obama, nice to see you. Mr. President, congratulations. And I was about to say, this is my wife. And I said, and he said, Willow Bay, NBA inside stuff. And she turned beet red. Obviously, he's an NBA fan too.
Well, I mean, you're talking late 80s, early 90s where we had less cable channels. And I remember I was in college when that show was on. We'd wake up Saturday, not feeling that great from the night before. And you'd put it on and it was like, cool, basketball. And I like these two people. And I don't know, it was just different. Now there's 9 million channels and we probably would have been on Disney Plus or Netflix on a Saturday.
Or whatever.
But the communal experience, I think, of all that stuff.
By the way, when I first started dating her, on Friday nights, she would track highlights of the games that night for the show the next morning out of a room in her apartment. And I'd be sitting in her living room and listening to her in the other room saying, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 tonight. Michael Jordan scored 35 points as the Bulls beat the Knicks yet again.
Right.
It's just kind of funny.
These NBA stars who all want to do more than be basketball players now and want to have their own businesses and their own thing. Do they consult you with this stuff? Do they ask for advice? They must.
Just a few of them.
That's it?
Yeah. I mean, there are a bunch that have reached out to seek my advice on things, but either they don't have the time or in some cases they're just not really as interested as someone may have suggested they should be at some point. And yet some of them really are. Chris is one of them. He's actually, he when he first met me, he was traded to the Clippers, as you know, almost traded to the Lakers. And he knew that I had Clipper tickets, and I guess he asked people, having just come to LA, is there anybody I should meet? And someone suggested you should meet the Disney guy.
Right.
Maybe because he had kids and eventually he'd want to take them to Disneyland. But and when we sat down, he told me he was looking for a mentor of some sort. And I said, well, let me explain. If you want to be a mentor, you got to take it seriously, meaning if you want some of my time, you have to be serious about it. And of all those that I've ever come in contact with that have had similar requests, he's taken it the most seriously.
These guys,
it's nice. I've developed a nice relationship. He's actually a good friend.
Yeah, it's interesting when these guys retire now. In the old days, it was like you do TV or maybe you become
a high school coach or whatever.
Yeah, or you become like the
fat.
local analyst or whatever. And now these guys are leaving and they're actually going on to do all kinds of stuff. Just out of curiosity, you've been to a lot of basketball games. What was the best game you've ever been to? Because you've gone to a lot of good ones.
I've never seen my team win a championship, because when the Knicks won against the Lakers way back,
73,
after getting past the Celtics, I guess, right? I didn't. I was in college still, and I probably couldn't afford a ticket. So I saw the Knicks play in the finals in '94. What's the best game I've ever seen? Boy, I've been to a lot of championships.
You must have gone to a lot of big Laker games.
I did.
Right?
I went to a lot of big Laker finals.
Yeah,
actually, against the Celtics. Actually, that Celtics series that the Celtics won, I wasn't a Laker fan, so I didn't have a rooting interest. That was a great series.
Yeah, that was
great.
Both of them were good battles.
Yes, I'd have to think about that. One of the more interesting games I ever went to was the finals against the Houston Rockets, the Knicks and the Houston Rockets.
Oh yeah,
June of
OJ.
'94.
Yeah,
and my seats were right behind the Knick bench, and at some point the game was being preempted by NBC, who was covering it because of the Bronco chase. It was Friday night. It was the Friday of the Bronco chase, and all the players on the Knick bench who were not in the game got up from the bench and went over to what was the press table, was on that side of the Madison Square Garden court, to watch the Bronco.
Oh my God,
the Bronco chase.
We should have interviewed you for the 30 for 30.
That was
I had no idea.
That 30 for 30, which was the chase.
Yeah,
and Arnold Palmer's retirement.
Oh yeah,
and the Rangers. Now I was at the 7th game of the Stanley Cup that year, which happened basically the same week.
That was one of my favorite 30 for 30s because we came up with it in a room like this.
The great 30 for 30.
We was like, ooh, the OJ Bronco chase. What? Didn't something else happen that day? And then we started going on Google, and it's like, oh, that happened? And it was like 5 things that happened in the same day.
It was Palmer retiring. It was the Rangers. In that case, that day, it was their ticker tape parade because they won the Stanley Cup, I think maybe the Thursday night before.
And it was World Cup.
Which was out here. I went to that was interesting.
World Cup game.
So that week, I bet I might be the only person that ever did this. I went to the Rangers, the final Stanley Cup game. Took my daughters to it against Vancouver.
Yeah.
I went to the Knicks Rockets game. I don't remember which one in the finals. And I went to the finals of the World Cup.
You did the 3 for?
Jesus. The finals of the World Cup was at the Rose Bowl.
That's impressive. That's impressive. You didn't have in your book any of the stuff about when LA was trying to get the 2 football teams, because you were involved in that.
Yes, you were critical.
You got mad at me.
You were critical of me for that.
Was I critical, or did I have a theory? I think I had a theory.
Well, no, you if you want to put it on the table.
Let's do it.
I'm right here. Suggested, and I can't recall how public you were, but I think you might have
said it on a podcast.
You suggested that my being in business with the NFL was a conflict of interest or potential, because I might push ESPN in a direction or skew the coverage of the league to be more positive and less negative. In other words,
I don't think I did that.
Really?
Did I do that?
That was the impression I had, which I would never do.
Well, we figured it out.
I never actually instructed ESPN to be less critical of the league. I always have instructed any of the journalism pursuits of the company, or ABC News or whatever, just to be accurate and to be fair. But I think that's what it was. Yeah, I was.
I'm like Mark McGuire. I'm not here to talk about the past.
Well, it's a long time ago. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Pete Rose wants to talk about it.
I probably was mad, though, because, one of the reasons I left ESPN was because I got into it with Goodell, and I was probably trying to come up with my own narrative for the whole thing.
It didn't work out very well.
No, it didn't work out.
Either one of us, maybe. Well, it's worked out for you.
We're here now.
It's worked out for you.
Oh, we're here now. It's great.
I was approached to help 2 teams. Initially, it was 1. It was the Raiders, and then it became 2. Moved to LA, and actually, Jerry Richardson was one that approached me.
Yeah,
and then and Mark Davis, and Dean Spanos ultimately, and I actually had an agreement with them that if they were successful in moving, that I would have had a relationship going forward. I was planning to leave Disney at the time too, so it was something that would have ultimately occurred after I had left.
Yeah.
And didn't pan, as you know, it didn't pan out. Did
you think that owners kind of resented that you came in and were Like, hey, let me tell you how it's going to work here in LA or how it could work. And they were like, who's this guy? I'm my own kind of rich guy. I don't need help from another rich guy.
I don't know. I don't think my presence mattered all that much. I think there are people in the league who believed, maybe, by the way, I'm not in any way disputing it, that Stan Kroenke's proposal, both the stadium proposal and just the proposal overall to move the team, was more attractive for the sport and the league than what Mark Davis and Dean Spanos were presenting.
Well,
I'll tell you this. Less theatrical. I mean, I think to Stan's credit, he believed that if you're going to move a team to LA, as Jerry Jones, by the way, proved in Dallas, build a football palace, build a great place.
And it sounds like it's going to be great. It's going to cost $6 billion, but it's going to be amazing.
Well, I guess it's expensive. Yes, most expensive stadium ever built in the history of the world.
Right.
But it could be the greatest stadium that's ever built, too. I actually spoke to someone who saw it recently and described it, and I've only flown over it. I have not seen it.
Yeah.
And from what I've seen from the air and what I've heard, it looks great. I think that's the right approach. If you're going to play that sport here, play it in a great place, and then I think winning is very important too.
I would argue that was another fork in the road moment that worked out in your favor, because I never understood why you wanted to leave Disney. I think you talked about in your book about how you feel like a CEO has a certain number of years, and at some point people are going to either start tuning you out or you're going to stop listening to people and a new voice needs to come in, all that stuff. But meanwhile, you had like the best job in the world.
Yeah,
and I still think you do.
Yeah, I still do. Yeah,
but it was weird that you didn't totally realize that.
Well,
or maybe
it wasn't
didn't.
about how great my job was. I felt a few times that overstaying one's welcome could be a big mistake, and I just didn't want to do that. I didn't want to either tempt fate or overstay my welcome. And as I said at the beginning of this conversation, I've been at this company a long time. Even if it ended, 5 years ago, I was at this company a long time.
Right.
And I just thought, it just felt like there was a time maybe for me to explore other things in the world, whether it was partial ownership of a sports team or running for office, or, there are a variety of different things that have come into my head in terms of alternative career paths or post-Disney adventures. So here I am, but now planning to leave the end of 2021.
I'll believe it when I see it. I know you're probably going to, but I don't know. Who leaves like a championship team? I guess Michael Jordan, Sandy Koufax.
Sandy Koufax, who probably no one who's listening ever heard of, right? I don't know. It's kind of sad.
No, Sandy Koufax, a legend.
But he was my era.
Yeah.
Baseball. And that book, Jane Levy's biography of him, one of the best sports biographies I've ever read. And one of the things that I took from that was actually quite interesting. I gave that book at one point to the senior management of ESPN, was how he got off the stage or off the field or the mound when he was at the top of his game.
Right. I think about like that 2017 stretch. When did you do that story you told in the book about the whiteboard? Was that right around then?
That was January of 2018.
That was one of my favorite stories. So if you haven't read the book, people listening out there, you've accumulated all these assets, but for some reason you hadn't actually seen them all in one place. So you grab a whiteboard and you separate it into these 3 different tiers. And you're like, I just want to see what we have here. And would you put like all the networks and the studios and all the stuff on one side? And in the middle, you put like all the technology and all that stuff.
I'll show it to you, by the way, when we leave this room.
Oh, I'd love to see it.
But yes.
What was in the middle?
After we acquired Fox, which was the initial announcement, it took longer than we expected, which was in December of 2017. I took Christmas off, and we do that here occasionally.
Yeah.
And I came back rejuvenated and ready to go in January of 2018, and decided, obviously I felt this great sense of new responsibility, or added responsibility, to figure out how do we manage all these assets now. The company was growing significantly. And I had my assistant roll a whiteboard into a conference room.
Which you hadn't done in like 12 years.
No,
right?
I'm not a whiteboard guy.
I'm not either.
I only used it one other time with Steve Jobs about pros and cons of buying Pixar, which I also wrote about. In this case, I stood in front of the whiteboard alone, and I listed all of our assets. And what I did was I listed all I'll call it the creative businesses, the studios, including everything from Pixar and Disney Animation and Marvel, but also the networks from ESPN and the networks we were acquiring, to National Geographic, to
FX,
Disney Channel and ABC and et cetera and so on. And on one side, so you have this gigantic collection of, I call them content engines or content creators. Yeah. In the middle, I had what I called I had a name for it, but I think in physical goods and physical experiences. So it's theme parks and consumer products. We're one of the largest sellers of merchandise in the world in terms of character merchandise.
Yeah.
And so theme parks around the world, 6 different locations and multiple Disney stores, that whole business, and cruise ships and resort in Hawaii. And then on the far, that was in the middle. And on the far right was what I called platform. And that was the technology engines that were needed to move all of that content to the consumer globally. And that also included monetization of those assets, so sales and distribution.
Yeah.
And user interface, starting to talk in more modern terms about how technology was going to change the way we bring content to people. So user interface and data collection and et cetera, all on one side. And what I envisioned was a unit of the company that would facilitate not only the distribution of, but the monetization of all of that content to the consumer. The middle group, physical goods and experiences, does it pretty much on their own and didn't really need any change. It's a gigantic business. And that whiteboard became, well, I looked and I stepped back. Sorry, after I looked at all the assets, I started plugging people's names in, figure out, an org chart is only as good as some of the people you have to man the key positions. And then I took a step back and looked at it.
It sounds like a movie scene. Like you pan back and the camera pans back and shows the whiteboard.
Yes, exactly.
It's like dramatic music playing.
Yes, the sun was, streaming through the curtains, bouncing off the whiteness of the whiteboard.
But then you brought other people in to point to it, right?
Background, dark writing.
Right. Different pen colors.
I think it was.
But then you brought people in to point to it, right?
When I looked at it and I congratulated myself alone because I thought it was so brilliant. I then had to immediately say, come see this. And I brought my CFO in and our general counsel and our head of HR and everyone I brought in. I said, aren't I great? Isn't this great?
But it all made sense when you saw it on the whiteboard. It was like the first time it's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, then you have to.
Would you say in the book, like, this is what a modern media company should look like?
Yes. And I had done, in that very brief period of time, meaning 2 weeks, I studied a bit too. In fact, I met with people at Google and I said, tell me how YouTube is structured. Interestingly enough, one of the people from YouTube said, well, there's a platform group and there's a product group and there's a content group. I said, well, what's the difference between product and content? And content was kind of the videos that are uploaded, and product was really platform. Oh, that's very interesting. That's how you organize that. And I looked at a few other companies too, Netflix and a few others, and just to get some sense.
When you created Disney Plus with your team, did you realize that every parent that had kids under like the age of 11 would demand to have it immediately? Because that's basically what happened. As soon as I heard the idea, I was like, this is going to work. My 2 kids are going to be like, get Disney Plus now, immediately.
Well, that's good to hear.
It had a lot of assets.
We knew that if we created it right, meaning presented it right, navigation, user interface, there's an elegance to it, and we had the content that we were planning to put on it, and we were going to add more to it, and we priced it right, which is very, very important.
Yeah.
Then it would be something that families would really want to have.
On the flip side, ESPN Plus still seems like it's trying to figure out what it is, because it's got like the live stuff works. I don't think people necessarily are going there to watch shows and the library and things like that. Whereas Disney Plus, like my kids will go there and be like, let's watch Jesse. And then they'll just crank out 5. And I think that's a tough hurdle with ESPN
Plus is still an incremental or an add-on product to ESPN. If you're really interested in the most popular live sports, you go to ESPN, not ESPN Plus. So it's an add-on service. But by the way, that provides, I think, good value for people who are interested in some very specific sports. Obviously, what we've done with some of the combat sports, for instance.
Yeah. How much time do we have left?
I'm okay.
We're up now.
Oh, we're good? All right. I'll wrap it up.
Nothing more to cover?
I had 2 more things.
Well, go ahead.
The first thing was, we did know each other when you reached out. You were a big fan and supporter and stuff. But I remember, I can't remember what happened. It was something with Countdown and people wrote something that was negative and I was really upset about it because it wasn't true. And I remember you just sent me this long email about, don't worry about this stuff. Who cares? Like, you're doing great stuff. Just keep doing what you're doing. And first of all, it was a great email to get, especially from somebody like you. But I was also like, oh, it makes sense why this guy is good at his job. Because, I'm just some random dude that works in your company that has how many people in it,
230 some odd thousand.
Right. And I'm like, but at the same time, it really did reset my brain and all that. So that was interesting. But the other thing is just, we're taping this the day that it got announced that I was selling my company to Spotify. And I was thinking about it in your book, because you have these different sections about when you have this crazy day and you kind of have to compartmentalize. I got to go here and I got to do this and I just got to do it and I just got to focus on this or whatever. I've been up since 2:55 in the morning because they announced it on the Swedish earnings time. And which sucked. And dealing with texts and emails all day and then the staff and planning and all that stuff and then came here to do it. But it reminded me.
Did you consider canceling this?
Not at all.
Oh, okay.
I never would have canceled on Bob Iger, but it just reminded me of that where it's like you talked about when you're the boss, sometimes you have these days where it's like, all right, this is what I got to do. I got this and I got this and I got to plow through this and I have this. Like even when you announced the Fox deal that day, you had all the Skipper stuff went down and you're just like, all right, now I'm going there. And
I think these jobs, when you're running complicated businesses or when an event like the one that you experienced today occurs, you have to be able to prioritize. And you have to be able to compartmentalize. You have to be able to move from subject to subject or put whatever happened, before away long enough so that you can focus on what you have to do next. I remember, funny, and it's not just about compartmentalizing the business side of things for each other, ourselves, like this interview versus your announcement earlier. It's also our personal lives too. I remember one of the acquisitions, I think it was the Marvel acquisition. And I had one of those days where you're at work for 20 hours or whatever it is. You get up crack of dawn. We announced it before the market opened. So I drove onto the Disney lot at 4 a.m. to get ready to go into Good Morning America, whatever it is. And finally, after dinner, I came home with kind of nothing left in the tank. And my younger son at the time had to learn the 13 colonies or state capitals or whatever it was. And there I am lying basically in bed with a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
2009. He was born 2002. 7-year-old, saying whatever. The capital of New York is Albany. It was state capitals. Is this and that. I'm thinking, boy, if this kid only knew what my day was like. We made a $4 billion acquisition that had been going all day long. And I had to show up for him.
I remember the last time I was here to see you was probably 6 weeks before I ended up leaving ESPN. And I remember I really wanted to come see you because I wanted in on good terms with you because it really meant a lot to me, your support of all the different things we did. And we talked for, I would say an hour and it was going past a little 4. And then your assistant came in and was like, the Star Wars guys are here. And you were like, oh yeah, the new trailer. And I was just like, this guy's life is amazing. He deals with me for an hour. And now he's going to watch the new Star Wars trailer, and then at 5:00 something else. But
one of the great things about this job is the variety of things that I can get involved in, and just how much fun they are. It's probably what I'll miss the most. I spent 5 or 6 hours this morning at Walt Disney Imagineering, and looked at names for new cruise ships and some design, a huge presentation that'll be on the lake at Epcot a couple of years, a design and music for that, a new attraction for Disneyland Paris, something new for Disneyland. It's sort of this. That's the story.
I don't
of my
know how
life.
you
It's
shut
great.
that off though. Like if you're really going to leave in 2021, you're not going to go play golf and.
No, I'm not a golfer.
What are you going to do? You're either going to have to own an NBA team or you have to run for president.
maybe
That's it.
maybe I'll own an NBA. I think of the two,
What's more
they're
realistic?
both expensive, by the way.
What's more realistic?
Well, I don't
you
know.
paused.
I don't know that either one of them is realistic.
This is where Xenia's like, all right, we
No.
got to end, Bob.
I don't know
Next.
that either one of them realistic. I think, of the two, the one that I probably would be more likely to pursue would be the NBA team. It'd be great to be an owner of an NBA team. I love
Did you
that
think
sport.
about when the Clippers came available? Were your wheels turning?
Not well. I was asked at that time to be part of a group.
Because Eisner bought the Angels when he was running Disney.
Yeah, the corporation.
Yeah. You could have done that with the
No,
Clippers.
he tried to. By the way, he tried very hard after he bought the Angels and the Ducks. I think it was the Ducks and the Angels. He tried very hard to buy the Clippers from Donald Sterling. Thought it would make a really interesting kind of three-team.
Sterling was never selling.
thing.
The only way it was happening was the way it played out.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we go, Jimmy Kimmel.
Yep.
Did you ever think he'd make it 20 years?
Nope. I thought he was the right choice at the time.
I thought it was going to be 20 days.
You
I
worked
was
on
there.
that show.
I know.
You were there.
We were really nervous the first
Well,
couple
after
weeks.
that first show.
Yeah. You were there.
I was there.
Didn't somebody throw up right in front of you?
Someone
No, that
threw
really
up.
happened. Remember we had the open bar before the show?
Lloyd Braun and I were the ones that made the decision to put Jimmy on.
Yes. Good decision.
Lloyd was a real proponent, and we looked at. I won't get into. We looked at a few different possibilities. Jimmy and
Well, Jon
actually,
Stewart
and
was in
someone
there.
else.
Yeah.
That would be right. And of the two, we thought they were both great. Jimmy was a lot cheaper, interestingly enough. I don't know how much that influenced us, but he seemed like every man kind of at the time. He had a way of connecting with people, of relating to people. And so we made the decision. We barely knew him. And then I decided to go to the first show. And I remember the mayhem, as you remember. And my reaction was, these are just children.
Yeah.
And unless they figure out how to behave as adults in a serious way, because they're doing a live show 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And this is on a network, and there's a lot of responsibility. This thing is never going to work. I remember leaving the theater then, same theater that he's in, thinking, oh my goodness, like we have got to hire some adults to supervise this thing.
Well, imagine me moving cross country to work for the show and also worrying about that 4 days in. Because I remember I had at least
George Clooney was a guest, right?
George Clooney, Warren Sapp, Coldplay playing on Hollywood Boulevard.
And Warren Sapp because he had just
won the Super Bowl.
Super Bowl,
yeah. And by the fourth day,
Coldplay.
Coldplay on the Hollywood Boulevard. It was kind of a moment.
Right.
It was a bad Super Bowl. It was the Bucks. Somebody. It was the year John Gruden won with them. But yeah, I think I'm just marvel that he's still doing it. Like he just he did his 3,000th show a couple weeks ago, and it was just like, oh my God. We were on a text thread like, oh my God.
I think he has gotten really good.
Yeah, I agree.
He has improved tremendously over the years. By the way, physically, he looks a lot better.
Looks great.
Too.
Yeah,
he's
looks
got
great.
a style about him, and he's fit. And
When we decided we were doing this, he texted me the day later because he was with you, and I always forget. Like you guys cross paths.
He said, "You're what? You're sitting with Bill Simmons?
Why is that
Why
happening?
would you do that?
This was enjoyable though,
You sell
right?
books.
Xenia's happy. This was fun.
It was fun. We
Thanks
didn't
for
get to talk sports that much.
Well, I'm going to come back. I want to
Boston
save
Red
some.
Sox.
I'll come back every 6 months. We just traded our
So
best
Red
player.
Sox, Celtics. So you are true Bruins, Red Sox,
whole
Celtics,
thing.
and Patriots.
Yeah. We had a really nice run, and now I feel like it's winding down.
The Red Sox?
Our quarterback's 43. Our owners are trading the best outfielder we've had in 60 years to save money.
The Bruins?
Bruins, well, that's hockey. You never know. Year by year,
okay.
It's like whoever gets hot for 2 months. And then the Celtics are probably our best bet now. So they're actually pretty good.
No trades in the next 24 hours for the Celtics?
I don't think so.
Good team.
Good team. Excited for it. We didn't talk about your Knicks. Probably a good idea.
That
should be the team you bought.
You sound like my son every day.
Does he try to get you to buy the Knicks?
Yeah, sure. We'll write a check. No problem. No.
Thanks for doing this.
Pleasure. Nice to be with you.